Many of the challenges that you have described here are generalized across European countries, and I dare say beyond Europe at a global level. I think Anna did such a fantastic job showing how the data reflects these shared challenges. The solutions, however, are likely to be local and to be specific to any setting. So I hope that as we wrap today up, we can think a bit more about what can be done to face these challenges, because I think we're clearly all very aware of the problems that exist. Now, being the last session of the day, a lot of what I had planned to say has already been said. So I'm going to try to focus on maybe some of the areas that have been less discussed. Coming from the perspective of the World Health Organization, an important topic that I think was implied in many of your comments, but not really discussed in detail, is the need to think about the health and care workforce as one entity. Because a lot of the issues that we are trying to address, a lot of the needs that we are trying to respond to are not social support needs alone. Many of the people we are trying to support have health issues that need to be addressed. They need to be supported by health professionals, they need health care, they need social support, and they need community integration and family support. So the challenge very much is to work around or maybe against the structures that have been put in place so that the care we deliver is integrated. There was a lot of discussion, and Clara mentioned several times the concept of person-centeredness, which has at its core the idea that services need to be organized around everything the person needs so that we respond in a successful and efficient manner. So I'm going to speak in what follows about the health and care workforce, thinking together about how different professions need to first be organized and specialized in their own areas, but very importantly, work together and coordinated. And because time is definitely going to be limited, and we want to keep it short, I want to give you the key messages in the first slide. The care workforce is the most important issue in long-term care because there is no care without caregivers. And everything we want for the care sector to be successful, to be sustainable, to be cost-effective, to have high quality, depends on having an adequately sized, adequately trained, and well-managed health and care workforce. The second issue I want to emphasize is that we cannot talk about evidence-informed policy without a strong evidence base. And today you heard of a lot of data, but much of this data, I think it was implicit in what was being said, is still insufficient, is still insufficiently developed, insufficiently structured, and not sufficiently used. And we have a lot of issues that come from the lack of well understood and consensus definitions, and I'm going to speak a bit about that. And finally, I want to make the case that investing in the health and care workforce, and this means investing in training, in professionalization, in recruitment, and in retention, is possible, is difficult, but is possible, but most importantly, it pays off. It's a necessary investment. So as an introduction, I'm going to skip over all the data about the shortages because you've heard about it and you've heard about the case of Spain. What I want to say is that I've been working in the field for, close to 15 years now, Kai maybe for over 30. And for the last years, I have been starting to hear, going into countries, one thing that I've never heard before, that human resource shortages are more pressing than funding shortages. So it has become the case that where funding was always the main issue, countries are telling us we have funded service packages for which there is a clear demand, but we cannot find the staff to deliver these services. Of course, funding and human resources, the demand and supply and the price are very closely linked together, but I think it's important to understand that right now in Europe, and probably globally, the main bottleneck to developing long-term care is the workforce. Now, what does WHO understand when we say the health and care workforce? I think it's important to underline, and this has been said by several speakers before, we're not looking only at formal employment that is paid. There are very important categories. The informal care that is both informal and mostly unpaid represents the majority of care. There's a large contingent of informal but paid, so non-specialized, non-professional workers that are being paid by families, often not with regular work contracts, that contribute a lot to the care sector. And Kai will talk much more about this than I will. And we have a set of voluntary care workers. So it's important when we think about what our human resources are to not look only at the small part of health and care workers. Now, again, I won't talk much about informal care because it was said, but I do want to emphasize, as was said before, that this is the biggest part of care. So when we talk about training, when we talk about working conditions, when we talk about social protection, we have to, in the same breath, think about formal health and care workers and doing the same things for informal caregivers to support them to keep delivering this care. Because informal care, as it is now, would be impossible, leave aside the fact that it's not desirable, but it would be impossible to replace entirely with formal care resources. And you can see here, we talked a lot today about the value of care. This is the value of care. And these are very likely underestimates of the enormous contribution that families and communities and informal caregivers practically offer, volunteer to the sector. So if we look at the professional side of the formal care workforce, what is it that we talk about? And WHO has proposed a package for universal health coverage that looks specifically at long-term care for older people and identifies 26 categories of actors that are relevant in the system. We heard about personal care workers and home helpers before. We heard about nurses. But in the long-term care workforce, we also have generalist doctors, specialist doctors, occupational therapists, physical therapists, and pharmacists, and many, many other health and care professionals, not to talk about the entire structure that is needed to operate the formal care systems: managers, accountants, planners, IT specialists. And make no mistake, these are being just as difficult to recruit nowadays in a sector that is generally overpaid as the care-specific professionals. So by this, I want to say again that it's important that we try to think of the very particular long-term care worker profiles in this universe of health and care professionals that all bring their contributions to the services older people receive. Now, of course, this is much easier said than done, and as soon as WHO proposed this definition, we started running into problems with measuring and operationalizing. Why? Because many of these professions are not uniformly defined across countries. We know more or less what a general practitioner is. We more or less have some agreement, at least in Europe, about what are the training requirements for a nurse. How about nursing assistants? How about healthcare assistants? These are profiles that don't exist at all in countries or that vary widely. Personal care workers recognized in different ways. And these are very difficult to trace and compare in statistics. So the OECD has done a gargantuan job in trying to do this, but I think Anna would agree with me that we are not always sure we are comparing like with like across countries. And in a sense, this affects every country in their own exercise of trying to learn from others and to trying to get good examples and good points of inspiration elsewhere. In the State of Long-Term Care approach, which WHO developed last year in collaboration with the European Commission, we propose what are some of the key aspects, key information that we should know about the health and care workforce in order to be able to plan strategically. And this will not surprise you. Yeah, we want to know what are our main worker profiles, what is the number, what is the gender composition, the age composition, how do they compare to the demand. But this is utterly insufficient. We need to know so much more. We need to know what the training that they receive is. We need to know what their working conditions are. We need to know how many are recruited in the sectors, how many stay in the sector, what turnover we have, how many do we manage to retain. We need to know about social protection and support they receive. And here, data becomes very, very scarce. On the other side, we should know almost the same things about our informal care workforce, whether these are paid live-in carers and migrant carers, or whether these are families. And it is important to understand how these two sides of the equation are balanced. Is there coordination between the family and the care workers, between the doctors and the care workers? Is this an ecosystem that is balanced, that is coordinated, and that is fair? And more often than not, unfortunately, of course, the answer is no. You can find all this information, definitions that we propose, and a glossary of terms that are aligned with the Council recommendation for long-term care in the State of LTC package, so I won't spend more time on this. Now, despite these data challenges, you have seen this morning already that we do know that there are some characteristics of the workforce that need to be taken very seriously and addressed with urgency. I'm going to talk more about the first one because it was my feeling in the morning that was less addressed. I'm going to talk a little bit about the aging of the workforce, again, because this is a reality and because this is a challenge, but is a challenge that we can hopefully turn in an opportunity. You've heard a lot about precarity and informality, and Kai will tell you more specifically about that, so I'll skip it. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the key insights for training of the care workforce that are aligned with the health sector and with community-based care and support, be it for older people, for disability support, or for people with mental health issues, addiction in the community. So first and foremost, I want to focus on the gender gap in health and care. And I want to emphasize very clearly that we talk about a gender gap, and in fact, we have different gaps. 6 at least that are being emphasized in a recent publication of WHO, which I strongly recommend you look through. One is the gender gap in unpaid health and care work, which was mentioned, that women do this overwhelmingly. Then we have a gender gap in participation. You heard many times before today, women dominate the workforce. But what was not as clearly said is that women do not dominate leadership position, decision-making position. More than that, despite being the majority of the workforce, there's still a gender earning gap in care. Women in the profession earn less than men. There's a working conditions gap, and Anna hinted at it this morning when she was talking about violence, about harassment, about abuse. There's a gender gap in data, because so many times we do not have gender disaggregated data. You would think this is a basic dimension, and it's still lacking. And finally, there's a gender gap in investment. I'll show you a little bit of data that I think brings this message home. This is the proportion of daily time spent on unpaid care. Proportion for men, and proportion for men on the vertical and for women on the horizontal line. If this proportion was equal, all the countries would be aligned on the diagonal. But what we see is that in no country where we collect data do men contribute equal amounts of paid work to women. Of course, this varies. Denmark, Finland, Germany, Sweden, closer to the diagonal. But look how far countries like Greece, like Portugal, even Spain, which is hidden in that big group there, are from the diagonal. This is work. So please notice that we use the term unpaid work. This is work. This is a productive, essential activity for the economy, whether we recognize it or such or no. I'll show you another statistic which I think is quite impressive, and Anna showed something similar before. The share of women in employment by sector, and this is data that comes from EU OSHA, and that was published in 2024, but I think it's data collected in 2019. Women represent 46% of the workforce generally, but 76% of the workforce in health, 82% in residential care, and 82% in social work. Globally, women represent 67% of the workforce, but they are overrepresented in lower paid, positions with lower decision-making power, whereas in the higher paid position with higher autonomy, higher professionalization, higher pay, and decision-making power, they remain underrepresented. Data on the left here shows you women in leadership, global leadership position, only 7.5% of CEO of health companies. World Health Assembly heads of delegations, only 23% are women. And generally, there's an estimate that while 7 in 10 workers in the health and care sector are women, only 1 in 4 senior roles are occupied by women. So women earn, on average, 24% less in the health and care sector, where they represent the vast majority of the workforce. Now, this is terrifying. I don't know what other word to use other than terrifying. If we're talking about working conditions, attractiveness of the job, and valuing of a job, here you have a statistic that you need to address, and we all need to do better on. I'll move quickly to the aging, because we talk a lot about the aging of the population, and we're now becoming more aware that as the population is aging, so is our health and care workforce. And you can see that in the residential care, long-term care, and health sector, this is more pronounced than in other sectors of the economy. Data that we published a couple years ago, this refers only to nurses, unfortunately, because we didn't have good comparable data on personal care workers, shows that in some countries in Europe, as much as 50%, 45% of the workforce is 55 and over. So in 10 years, they are reaching retirement age. It was mentioned before, we can barely keep up with training to respond to demand. We're not even talking about the cliffhanger that is coming once this important part of the workforce reaches retirement age. Spain is somewhere closer to the middle, so it's closer to 20%, but that is still a very important part of the workforce. So I'm going to skip a little bit over the precarity of employment because this was mentioned, and I'm going to mention in the part-time employment only one important aspect, that we have some data on part-time employment, but we do not have a good understanding of how much of this part-time employment is voluntary and how much is involuntary. And I'll link this to what I was saying before about the aging workforce, because many countries are looking into flexible working arrangements in the last years, close to retirement or even after retirement, so they can retain for a longer time some part of the health and care workforce. This was done with some success during the pandemic, when, especially in the health sector, countries were trying to get back into the workforce, new retirees, or keep people for longer, even for part-time arrangements. So it would be important to disaggregate this. Not that we want everyone to work full-time, but it's important that those who want and can work full-time should be afforded the opportunity. And finally, another statistic that I found very interesting that OSHA published last year is the percentage of health and care workers that have to hold multiple jobs. And this is mainly driven by the necessity to make ends meet, to make an earning wage. And as you can see, Spain is here, it's about 6%. Oh, you can't see my cursor there, on the left-hand side. But we have countries in Europe where almost 1/4 of health and care workers need to hold multiple jobs. Now, I won't talk too much about professionalization, because I think the best way to do this would be to walk you through some examples. First and foremost, there was a lot of discussion today about competencies, skills, and tasks, and I will not mention that again, but because I think Clara did a great job in highlighting why it's important we train for competencies rather than for specific tasks that are necessary on the job. And I want to show you what are the competencies that we consider to be essential for the health workforce in general. And I think you'll recognize that many of these are in fact key competencies also for the care workforce. So in fact, it's no different. You heard about person-centeredness, and I'm very happy that this is already a key aspect of training in Spain. Decision-making, communication, collaboration, evidence-informed practice, and personal conduct. These are key competencies that we need in every role. And Clara was talking about the core curriculum and the modular specialization. This is where a core curriculum should be grounded, because this is what would allow health and care professionals to share a common learning basis that facilitates integration and coordination of care, and that ensures that we can use this workforce flexibly, and they can be facilitated to move through different roles and have career pathways and career progression. Now, this year, only a few months ago, we published a report that looks at community-based care and support for people with disabilities and older people with care needs. And we worked with a group of international experts in the long-term care and disability support sector to understand what these services are, where the commonalities and where the specificities are. And we went through the same exercise of trying to understand what are the key professional roles and how should they be trained. And we came up with exactly the same core categories of competencies. Of course, in the specific examples, in the specific practice, there are differences, but it still revolves around the aspect of person-centeredness, of decision-making, of collaboration, of communication, and evidence-informed practice. Yeah, what does this mean? I mean, I'm not going to go through all the details. I do encourage you to look through the publication, because there we also try to map specific type of services with the key health and care worker profiles that need to be involved. Yeah, so we talk about rehabilitation and reablement. Are these services that can be delivered by personal care workers only? No, you need occupational therapists, you need physiotherapists, you need social workers. You very commonly need nurses as well that can continue to provide needed health services. You need involvement for GPs, and you need coordination often with community organizations. Another important thing that I think was discussed today, and I have two examples prepared. I think I'm going to go only through one, and maybe I'll let you decide which one, is to look at two examples of countries. I prepared Denmark and Austria, and how they have gone about creating specialized long-term care worker profiles, how they go about training, accreditation, licensing, and continuous education. Maybe I talk more about Austria is more similar in the regionalization. Denmark maybe is a bit more specific. So maybe, I don't know, someone from the room should call a preference. I'm happy to leave you the slides, and you can look into both. But are you curious about more of one other than the other? Austria, okay. Austria. So this actually, I think, would be the better example, because it would link nicely to, I think, what Kai will talk about with the live-in carers and migrant care workers. So Austria recognizes two specific long-term care professionals. The Pflegeassistents, these would be nursing assistant, for lack of a better translation, and this has and the Pflegefachassistent, and so specialized nursing assistant, if you want. But it's considered almost like a tiered level of specialization. You have a level 1 entry-level training, a level 2 more specialized level training. And you can see that they have similar tasks that really are just increasing in responsibility and in complexity, but they very much overlap to the typical long-term care support aspects that have to do with basic nursing tasks, like providing care, participating in administration of care, personal care, coordinating with health and care professionals. And actually, when you reach the more advanced level, the specialized nursing assistant, some of the tasks overlap with those that traditionally nurses would have been doing. And this is something that was mentioned here this morning. Can we shift some of the tasks for more specialized personnel towards new worker profiles, because this would be more efficient. Like administration of medication was one specific example. And this is what Austria has been trying to do, to create these intermediate, almost continuous spectrum of profiles that could be more flexibly adapted. Now, what are the education requirements? For the first entry level, there's a 1-year training, and you can see that this is a mixed training that brings together theory and practice. So in fact, an important part of the training was hands-on practical training. Now, this is based on the fundamentals of nursing. There's a dedicated curriculum that Kai could explain, took quite a while to develop. And it's practically an entry point, if you want, to further specialization. So now you have not only received a certificate of a personal care worker, but you have received, if you want, an entry point into a career progression that already facilitates you to go to the level 2, to the second training. Now, this is a longer training course, yeah, with pretty much in total over 3,000 hours of qualification, so quite more ambitious than what Clara was describing. But again, a lot of this is on-the-job training, is practical training, is actual work to develop competencies and skills in practice. And with the same mentality and with the same ambition as before, it opens up the way to further education, to university education, to bachelor education. So these are, in a sense, a continuum of training steps, with the hope that this helps professionalize and this helps make the profession more attractive, that you don't get stuck in a box, but it allows you to work while you continually develop your role. Now, these are two highly specialized and dedicated care worker roles, but we also have a specific training, which is, in a sense, a lower level training of home helper. So you can see that this long-term care worker profile does not have specific nursing competencies. This is much more about household management and support in the home than it is about long-term care, personal care, and further on medical care tasks. So in a sense, again, there's still a fragmentation, yeah? So while on the nursing and personal care side, there has been a continuum of integration, this is not really a coherent picture, because it still leaves aside in a box of its own this profile of personal care workers. Of course, this is a much less ambitious training structure, 200 hours of theory, 200 practical hours of work, practically with a care provider. It requires a final examination and it provides a certificate, but it does not link you into this system that I have described before. So now, Kai can tell you more of the history from a lived perspective, working and living in Austria for many years. But this system, in fact, was implemented at national level, was developed at regional level, implemented at national level, which I understand is also the ambition in Spain, to create a system that is uniform at the national level and that allows a certain level of uniformity, but that also creates flexibility of movement for the workforce. Now, to what extent this can be truly standardized or made more uniform at European level is a big question mark, because I heard before this idea of, can we align with international practices? Austria, in fact, is not so different from other European countries like Germany, but it's quite different, for example, from Denmark. And while they both have their own structured programs, they are not immediately transferable. And even in countries where we do have similar systems, these accreditations are not they're not recognized. Yeah. So this was all to say that there is value in generating uniformity and generating a continuum, a career pathway that links and puts together different worker profiles, but there are limitations to what can be done. And as of now, there really is not a global or European framework that would really facilitate knowledge and exchange and uniformity at international level. Now, I won't go through the training of nurses and the training of qualified social assistants in Austria, but I want to really, the point I was trying to make here is that as compared to these long-term care profiles, which are specific to Austria and which have been designed to be continuous with nursing education, in the area of social work, and especially in the area of nursing, we do have more standardization. We do have a system of European credits and a basic curriculum. So while the case of Austria for the long-term care workforce that is specific to this sector is getting closer to this ideal, it is not quite there. And while it facilitates entrance into a bachelor, it doesn't necessarily link with this standardized curriculum for specialist types of nursing or specialist profiles within the long-term care sector. Now, I think what would be important also to say, and it was mentioned this morning, is that our ambition is not only to train better the people who come in the sector, but our ambition is also to make sure that the people who are already in the sector can maintain their skills. So in the example of Austria, I think it's important to emphasize the aspect of continuous education, which is required by law. Yeah. What exactly this education is focused on and whether one can specialize more or less still remains an issue. But as you can see on the right-hand side, many of the topics that are prevalent in this continuous education are topics that are linked to the shape the demand for care is taking. So you'll see here aspects linked to gerontology, you'll see aspects linked to dementia, you'll see aspects linked to care for people with disabilities, or even more specialized than that, aspects linked to continence care and continence advice, or with wound care and palliative end-of-life care. Now, maybe I wouldn't go through the specificities of the authorization to work. This is just to say, really, the point was that I think what's important is to have a national system, to have a system of licensing and accreditation which allows you to truly monitor the workforce. And then I want to step very quickly, do I have 5 more minutes or so, in some of the key investments to achieve this. Because I was talking in the beginning, what are the issues, but what are some of the solutions? So first and foremost, starting with the gender aspect, I think it's essential that we understand that the core issues are not in health and care. They're just manifesting here more strongly than in other sectors. We need to build the legal foundations for equality. And I think actually Spain is one of the countries in Europe that has put gender equity very high on its policy agenda, and this is not for today. It's been for a few years that Spain has been one of the main promoters in Europe of a strong gender equity agenda. But it still is the case in Spain, as in many European countries, that we need to fight against cultural traditions that still place women in very clearly gender roles and place a lot of the care burden on them, while traditionally orienting them away from training into science, technology, leadership, management, which tend to be seen more as masculine roles. Now, how to address this in the workplace, specifically in the care? Well, many different strategies have been tried. Quotas for gender equity in leadership is one. specific targets, publication of data like the one I showed you today, and really making a point of highlighting constantly these unfair gender gaps. But most importantly, probably, is to invest in the capacity of women to lead. And important interventions that were not as emphasized today are opportunities for peer support and for mentorship for women in the workforce, to build visibility and increase visibility of women leaders in this workforce. Now, I'm really encouraged to see in the room mostly women. So again, I think that probably Spain is ahead of the curve in this regard. But again, it's not only about recognizing the value of care, but it's also about building capacity for power, for leadership, and for decision making that represents the workforce and reflects a better understanding of what are the main challenges of the workforce. So what we propose generally in all health and care policy is to focus on those interventions, or to always inquire if the policy interventions that we are considering are gender specific or gender transformative, because this is a feminized workforce. So every time there is a policy that is being considered, there should be an interrogation of how is it promoting specifically the interests of women. And as we go now through some of the strategies that are being implemented in countries, we can maybe try to interrogate ourselves exactly this. So for example, investment in education and training. What are some of the recommendations that WHO proposes for the health and care workforce? The co-development of a standardized competency-based training curricula. This is not very gender specific, but if we have dedicated training and dedicated mentorship programs to encourage leadership as part of core training, then this would benefit the women in the workforce, which are the majority. So this is really part of continuous learning and continuous development, not only care competencies, but also decision-making and leadership competencies. Now, in the continuous professional development programs, I won't go into detail, but I want to say that what would be very important and is often missed there is the component of interprofessional education. So designing trainings that try to bring together different worker profiles, to facilitate coordination, to facilitate better understanding. And the leveraging of digital tools, I won't emphasize too much because Anna already mentioned it. Strategies to improve recruitment. How do we bring people in the workforce? I said before, promoting returning to work and delaying early retirement. This is a strategy that has been implemented with some success in some European countries. I'm thinking of Germany, I'm thinking of Estonia, but also outside Europe, in Japan and Australia, with such incentives of flexible working conditions, part-time contracts, limited working contracts. Other important aspects to bring in a new workforce have to do with abolishing fees and remunerating traineeships. And in fact, the case of Austria is telling, because Kai was telling me just yesterday that when the training for long-term care workers were introduced, it was one of the very few specialist trainings in Austria which was not fully funded by the public sector. So those who took it had to pay for it, either them or the provider. Yeah? So abolishing these entry barriers, making sure that the entry barriers in the system are as low as possible, very important. Now, campaigns to improve attractiveness, Anna already mentioned that. And I'm highlighting at the end, because Kai will talk about it, that overwhelmingly countries have focused on migration and international recruitment, because it often seems like the easier thing to do. And there's clearly a need to understand that migration will need to be part of the solution for a sustainable health and care workforce in Europe. But we need to be more realistic about what the ethical issues of this are, what the effects are in the receiving countries and in the sending countries, and what are the perspectives of this migrant workforce long term. Because it is important that we think of solutions that are not extractive, that do not continue to leverage the cheap work of women from other countries, which continue to be disempowered and continue to be limited in their opportunities to grow. So I'll leave this as a big question mark, and Kai will talk a bit more about it. And I'll finally end with strategies to improve retention. These have been mentioned before. They're simple. Increase pay, improve working conditions. There is not so much that we need to discuss here, but because it was mentioned earlier, the aspect of introducing staff to resident ratio and staff to user ratios is an essential part of this, because it is a way to ensure that the pressure and the responsibility that care workers perceive is better. Now, we do have examples of where that has backfired, so it's not such an easy proposition, but clearly these are ways that these are absolutely essential, as Carlos was saying before, entry point interventions without which we cannot make progress. Thank you very much. That's it for me.
Thank you very much, Estefania. Incluso has ahorrado 10 minutos que nos vienen súper bien. Vamos a dar paso, si queréis, a una ronda de preguntas. Si alguien tiene alguna cuestión que realizar a Estefania, pues se le facilita el micrófono. Por aquí.
No sé si tiene que ver con este caso, vamos, con lo que se ha dicho aquí o con lo que viene, pero ¿por qué no hay una directiva europea? Ha nombrado a la Comisión Europea. ¿Por qué no hay una directiva europea sobre residencias o sobre cuidados y solo hay recomendaciones? Es que es algo que no tiene mucho sentido.
No, it's a very good question. The reality of it is that this is the limit of European competencies in the sector of social care. As you know, health and social protection, to a very large extent, these are national competencies. So the European Union does not have the power to legislate. For example, in the labor market aspect, the European Union has much more power. And you might remember that just a few years back, we had a directive on balance between care and work. Work and leisure. What is the European Directive of Work-Life Balance? That's what it's called. Which actually, had to do with the rights of people to work, but to maintain also a balance with leisure and personal care. So, and in fact, the European Union is investing a lot in studies of the long-term care workforce. They are looking into the legality of many of these irregular types of agreements. This study that I kept quoting, the EU OSHA, this is the Occupational Health and Safety and Health Agency, is also looking a lot into working conditions and ensuring that the minimum standards of safety and health at work are respected. But in imposing legislation, in imposing minimum quality criteria, the European Union does not have the competencies. So the Council recommendation that we have seen 2 years ago is the absolute highest level of European level legislation that we can see. And it was truly an impressive achievement. What they have done, and I think I'm curious if Anna agrees, I think they've been trying to invest not through regulation and limitation, not the stick, but through incentives. There has been a very significant increase in financing through the European Social Fund and through the Recovery and Resilience Plan and through other EASI and other European funding streams in long-term care, which before did not used to be the case. Now we might see that change with the geopolitical situation and with the new framework. But unfortunately, these are the tools that Europe has at its disposal. And I dare say, this is my personal impression, this is not the official position of the European Union, that it would be extremely difficult to legislate, because in many of the topics that we are talking about, it would be nearly impossible to achieve consensus between countries. I'll pick the example of workforce migration because it's near and dear to my heart. I come from Romania originally, and Romania has been through exactly this process of losing an enormous part of its health workforce a few years back when mobility of healthcare professionals was possible. And it still is the case that we cannot retain even half of the doctors and the nurses that we train. Now, this is catastrophic for our health and care system. This is not different now with the care workforce. So I know that Spain draws a lot on informal care resources and migrant cares from South American countries, but I also know there are over 1 million Romanians working and living in Spain, many of whom work in care and work in non-formal positions. Again, there are complexities to these issues that are always beneficiaries and losers, and it's very hard to imagine that there will be a political consensus. I don't know if Anna wants to add anything. Do you?
Perdón, pero una directiva europea reduciría ese problema de dumping de trabajadores entre unos y otros países, por un lado, y por otro lado, ayudaría, porque en España además tenemos el problema de que al estar las autonomías descentralizadas, naturalmente la Comisión Europea no lo hace, no hay directiva europea, las leyes estatales en España tampoco existe como tal, o poco, y luego se reduce a los caciquismos de cada comunidad autónoma. Y al final vamos a llegar a que vamos a hacer cada uno lo que queremos.
I don't disagree with you, but I think that's part of the issue that you just said here at the end. If it's difficult for Spanish regions to agree with each other, they have a common culture, a common language, a common understanding. Imagine how much more difficult it is to reach agreement at European level. I don't want to seem pessimistic. Maybe others have a more optimistic view. This is just my interpretation. But I don't see it as a good strategy to wait for European level intervention.
Ana, do you have something to say? ¿Podéis darle el micrófono?
Gracias. Yo simplemente añadir por mi parte que, bueno, pues confirmar un poco lo que ha dicho Estefanía en el sentido de que estas decisiones a nivel europeo tienen que ser un consenso entre los países y que ya fue muy difícil tener ese consenso para esa directiva, que son solo 5 días al año para que la gente pueda tomarse como cuidados. Y son 5 días al año no remunerados. Pero también decir que, aunque esto parezca poco, ha hecho avanzar mucho a países que no tenían ni siquiera este mínimo. Y ahí es donde sí pienso que, aunque no hayan directivas, se está avanzando mucho en el sentido de que hay una estrategia de cuidados a nivel europeo. Y que eso implica que todos los países tienen que tener un coordinador y que se está haciendo mucho a nivel de documentar lo que está pasando en el sector, en el sentido de que hay un grupo a nivel de la Unión Europea de indicadores sobre la estrategia, a nivel de calidad, a nivel de trabajadores, también los familiares y del acceso. Y que gracias a eso este tema se está mirando mucho más en los países y también todos los países tienen que tener un plan de acción y hay países, digamos, que están en el punto de mira de la Unión Europea porque ya empezando a ver con estos indicadores se ven que están muy por debajo de la media y se les ha pedido que hagan un esfuerzo. Entonces de alguna manera, aunque no haya directivas, se está avanzando gracias a esto.
And I just remembered you were talking before about staffing ratios. So I can tell you, colleagues who work on the health workforce at WHO Europe are collaborating with the Spanish with the Ministry of Health in Spain. They have just started a project that will look exactly at proposing or evaluating what would be potential levels of recommendation for staffing ratios. And if I remember correctly, they will be looking at hospital, geriatric care units in hospital, but also residential care facilities. So here again, there's a big question mark of working closer together between health and social. And it would be very, very useful if these exercises would not be done 7 times by 7 different ministries, but they would be done in a coordinated way so that they make sense and are organized. So again, the first challenge that needs to be faced has to be national, and then we can certainly hope for support at European level, but the smaller we start, the more likely we are to succeed, I believe. Okay, I need to switch now.
Muchas gracias, Estefanía. Bueno, y también nos acompaña Kai Leixering, director ejecutivo del European Center for Social Welfare Policy and Research en Viena, con formación en ciencias políticas y política social. Ha liderado numerosos proyectos en investigación y consultoría política en Europa, centrados en el envejecimiento, la salud y los cuidados de larga duración. Su trabajo en colaboración con organismos como la OCDE, la OMS y la UNECE ha sido fundamental para el desarrollo de políticas basadas en evidencia, abordando aspectos clave como la calidad, la financiación y la participación de las personas cuidadoras y usuarias. Kai, start what you want.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the introduction and for the invitation, especially. It's very difficult now to to come to my presentation, which would be a repetition of many of the things that have been done already. I would like to start with concern because, well, I'm now working, yeah, it sounds really weird, 35 years, towards promoting long-term care, integrating social and health services. Yeah, and many of the issues we had 30 years ago, we still have here, and many have even got worse. But on the other hand, I'm also optimistic because I see, well, not only OECD, WHO, also EU are now, and national governments are now talking about long-term care as a term that 30 years ago, I think even in Spain was not existing, was not used. I think you used dependencia something. Yeah. So I see some progress here, and so I see my task now for the next 20 minutes or so to just wrap up and have a look mainly at this question: is migration a solution, or is it part of new problems? And what are the trends here, and what should we really look at in this context? It is clear and has been said there is a large array of long-term care workers, but actually, is there anybody here in the room who would define him or herself as a long-term care worker? No? Perhaps as a health worker? Or as a social worker? Something like that. So we still have, yeah, we are starting from here. Yeah? So actually we are talking about something that is not really existing because even in long-term care, people working in long-term care, they got their their education, either in social care or in health care. And we saw, well, there are some first developments where this is getting mixed. And we know that this has been a sector that has produced growth, job growth, over the past 20 years, mainly for women. And we know that more growth is needed. And it reminds me of when I started to work in this in the beginning of the 90s. One article from a Swedish colleague struck me most because he had calculated if the standard of long-term care at that time in Sweden, so care for older persons, should have remained the same as it was in the beginning of the 90s. The calculation was that by the end of the 2010s, everybody who appeared newly on the Swedish labor market would have to have worked in long-term care. And this was the start of a change. So here we are talking about a country that was far ahead of most other countries and still is. But there the policies changed and they said, well, okay, we cannot keep this standard. We need to reduce this, and actually this was happened. We need to reduce, on the one hand, residential care, but we also need to reduce the spread of services, and we need to focus them on, or target them on the most vulnerable, the most needy. This was what happened. While other countries caught up during these past 2 decades, 3 decades. So here there is development, but if you look at this data, you see that actually since about 15 years, there is no real development, sorry to say. There is keeping stable, but at the same time, as the demand is rising, we still have the same percentage of care workers in this sector. And well, now we are saying, well, we need to increase this over the next 10 years, 20 years, and the calculations are changing every year. But in any case, we see there is no, there are only a few countries where there is really an increasing share of home care workers, in this case home care workers, and each policy document of each country says we have to increase home care, care at home, people want to stay at home. But actually what happens, and here I come to my main slide here, which is, well, the person in need of care is currently looking, and especially his or her informal carers, family, they are confronted with a huge system and a large array of services, professions, you name it, starting from the primary health care, perhaps the GP, with whom they have had a relationship over their life, but now they are needing care, and the GP has no idea what this means. Perhaps the nurse, if there is a real primary care system, there might be a nurse in the office and might have some idea. And then persons in the meantime have heard about, well, there is a system of support, there is in Germany a long-term care insurance, or in Austria a long-term care allowance. You heard that and you're looking for somebody. And you are trapped between this healthcare system where you, in many countries, at least in those with universal health, you don't pay. But as soon as you are using these social care or now long-term care services, you have to pay. And many of the data we saw today of expenditures and so on, this is only public expenditure, not out-of-pocket payments that, especially in long-term care, are very high. And I'm not yet talking about the opportunity costs of informal care. So whenever you touch upon here some home care or whatever, you might get, of course, some subsidy and allowance, but with this, you need to pay for the care services, but you also need to pay for the rest of your life. And this is often not seen. So here we have, on the one hand, the health and social care divide, and on the other hand, and actually this lower part of the slide should be 80%, because here you have the formal-informal care divide, where the informal carers are not seen as part of the care workforce, and actually they should be taken into account because they are providing most of the care. So now what happens? This is a very nice picture how it could be and how we could organize also these emerging long-term care professions in between social and health care. But we are confronted with shortages in this sector wherever you go. So what happens, or what was seen as a solution, was perhaps to get migrants from other countries in social care, but especially also in healthcare, so in the formal care system. And then what happened, because people were, they didn't know what to do anymore, because even if they were able to pay or to pay something, the contributions to care homes were too high. Care services, community care services were not available or not sufficient. What do you get? At best, you might get 3 hours per day. Even you show me the country. So 3 hours per week, this for long-term care needs is just not sufficient. So what happened is a kind of help yourself, do it yourself, IKEA for care, and this is, you find somebody from a country where people are unemployed and or have lower wages. And Europe is, also fortunate because they have some of these countries close by, like Austria or Germany, Italy, Spain, in a way. I come to that. So we get somebody from there to replace what used to be, what used to be often the woman's role in the family. But in the meantime, women are employed, are in the labor force, not only in care, but also in care, and therefore, or are mobile in another region, in another country, and cannot fulfill this role. So the migrant in the family was the model. And this was, of course, a problem if you have long-term care systems, and we all have them, where the informal carers have the most fundamental role. Then here you have now different roles of migrants within these emerging long-term care systems. Of course, you have them professionals, and here you have the problem of recognition of language, not so much in Spain, because you can build on South Americans, for example. They speak Spanish, but imagine in Austria. In Austria, it is even difficult for Germans to get the recognition of the professional education. Not to speak of the language, but this is another. You also have dialects and different, so you know what I'm talking about. So this is one problem with the professionals in the formal health system and migrants. Then you have professionals in long-term care, mainly in residential settings, where they can still, of course, be in a team and are supported by co-workers, while in community care this is a bit more difficult. And then you have the live-in migrant carers, and they are in the family in Austria. It developed in the 90s, especially also with the introduction of the long-term care allowance, because then Austrians in need of care were searching for services, had some more money, apart from their pension, and they found live-in carers from Slovakia, which is from Vienna, not even 50 kilometers. So there was an exchange that went on until 2006, and there was a big scandal because also I think, what was it, the mother-in-law of the then chancellor had also a live-in migrant from Slovakia, and of course moonlighting, so not registered. So this was then the beginning of a reform where regulation of this was an issue, and I just show you what this meant. So it was a legalized approach to combat moonlighting. There was a Personal Care Act introduced, where it got. So there were two models. One is you employ the live-in carer. The other was the live-in carers should register with the Chamber of Commerce as self-employed, and then the working time and so on is not so important anymore. So the employment model actually was not chosen, only by 0.1%. There was even a delegation of care tasks like the medication. These personal carers can get a certificate from the doctor, a delegation that they can give medication. And there was a growth from about 15,000 in 2008 to up to 64,000 in 2018. And if you imagine the full-time equivalents in Austria of long-term care workers in residential care and community care would be around 55,000. So this was incredible. In the meantime, and then there was also a pandemic in between, we have now 57,000, and there was a change, because in the beginning it was mainly 2 weekly shifts from Slovakia, and Slovakian live-in carers. Now Slovakians are only 25%, and Romanians are almost 50%. So the model changed a bit. They are now working for 1 month before going back home. You know, this is also existing in Spain and in Italy. And actually many Romanians are also in Italy, and there is even, I recently heard about this, the Sindrome Italia, which is existing when these live-in carers, because in Italy they stay almost the whole year and then go back, and they come back with a kind of post-traumatic stress syndrome. So this is how we are treating long-term care, and this is, I think, not really a solution. The Austrian solution is trying to square the circle, but in between the self-employed and the family, there are also 900 brokering agencies. And so these so-called self-employed are actually dependent on the agencies and on the families where they are. So I don't think that this is something sustainable for the next time. The thing is more, how can we integrate these persons into the long-term care labor force, or at least support them. I think this is where I stop and would like to go into a discussion, because what we have here, long-term care, is a real specific area with this importance of informal care and the necessity to coordinate informal and formal issues in this, and also in this triangle that is actually producing welfare, but in this case long-term care, between the state, so I talked about the public sector that is providing money, but there is also a whole lot of market in it. In some countries also more or less third sector. And there is a huge area of informal care and the, I call it the functional equivalent, migrant carers in the family. And this mix is of course in constant change, and the question is how we can make this sustainable and bring it together with all the nice concepts we have about integrating formal and integrating health and social care. But this is still not really producing a real long-term care sector. So I think that we have to overcome this fragmented labor market in long-term care and try to discuss this together, also to gather data more, because we have many black boxes here. What happens in the families, in these relationships in the family? How can we make this open long-term care to, out of the family to the community? How can we also regulate this in a more communitarian way, rather than what we saw over the past 30 years? And this is another topic we could talk about, another summer school. So what happened with the marketization of long-term care? We have seen many countries that have opened their markets in long-term care for actually huge investment firms, and at the same time try to regulate this with more or less success. And I think also here is an important aspect to be discussed, what impact this privatization and this profit orientation in the sector has on the workforce. We see this in some countries. And then, how to get this together in really a long-term care system. But to conclude, I started with all the concerns, but I said I'm also optimistic, because people like Stefania at WHO, or Anna at OECD, and other, also World Bank. So there are now more and more international organizations dealing with long-term care. Also many countries see that there is an important impact of not dealing with long-term care, and therefore I think that there will be better developments over the next 30 years. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I send you the original presentation afterwards, so you can have a look there.
Sí, todas las presentaciones serán compartidas a través de la dirección del curso. Turno de preguntas. ¿Alguna pregunta para Kai? Si no, yo tengo alguna para mirar. Juan.
Ok, Estefanía. Os voy a preguntar en español. ¿Sí? Bueno, enhorabuena por vuestras presentaciones. Ambas han sido excelentes. Veréis, en España, cuando estábamos comenzando a construir, o cuando comenzó la reforma de nuestro sistema de atención a la dependencia, vino una gran crisis económica. Y eso afectó a todos los servicios públicos esenciales, menos las pensiones. Las pensiones se salvaron, pero todos los demás se vieron afectados muchísimo. De los que más seguramente fue la atención a la dependencia. Mi pregunta sería, en un contexto donde varios países de la Unión Europea, algunos de los más importantes económicamente, no están en muy buena situación económica, ¿cuál es vuestra experiencia? ¿Cómo reaccionan los países? ¿O cómo afecta el sistema de cuidados de larga duración cuando el ciclo económico cambia? ¿Y cómo afecta esto también al capital humano y a estos cambios entre el cuidado profesional reconocido y los cuidados grises o sumergidos?
Because the question is so easy. So maybe I'm sharing my impression more than WHO's position formally. But I think there is no point in hiding from the reality that whenever there are economic downturns or geopolitical tensions like we're seeing now with security crisis, social investment, public investment in all social protection aspects goes down. And it affects health, and it affects long-term care, and sometimes it affects pensions, although as you're saying, that's politically more difficult to do. So tends to be more protected. And this is clearly not only the case of Spain. I think after the crisis across Europe, we've seen this. And in all honesty, it seems now that we are at a moment where there will be a downturn in European investment and national investment because there are other general geopolitical priorities. I think we're trying to talk more about it from the perspective of system resilience and highlighting how vulnerable both the health and the long-term care systems are to these variations in investment. And what we are trying to do at WHO is really emphasize the investment case, showing how every dollar you put in health or you put in long-term care brings economical and societal benefits 10 times as large. And as Kai was saying, what is the opportunity cost? So that it becomes more difficult to reduce this. And so that also we change our mentality from calling it cost to calling it investment, because the perception is very different. Now, to what extent this is going to function, it's going to work, I don't know. I think, unfortunately, it's always going to be an area that's going to be affected by public investment fluctuations. And then, of course, it's left for households to pick this up. And and when I say households, I mean mostly women, and I don't think it's a surprise for anyone that it just contributes to perpetuation of inequalities, and we've seen this accumulate through different economic cycles. So I don't really have a solution there, other than saying that the more successful we are to talk about investment and trying to mobilize both private investment, but in a managed, regulated way, and public investment, the better off will be.
Yeah, I think the word is really investment. But investment in what? I think one thing in this area is also investing in learning and quality development, and I see there are initiatives here, both at the legal level but also on the practical level. And what I also see is that we are getting more and more aware of the fact that not everybody is able to care, because I think for a long time, again, when I started in this, wherever I came, well, why should I invest in long-term care? This is done by my wife anyway. So I don't hear this anymore in many countries, but still in some. So this, because it is really, then it becomes a cost, because you are throwing away skills. If, for example, a woman in their 40s stops working in paid employment and gets lost for the labor market, and on the other hand, you have also all these informal carers, and I think that they are often going invisible. If they are in employment and have this double burden of being employed and at the same time needing to care for somebody. By the way, there are also thousands of so-called young adult carers, so young people still at school who are carers or starting their career as carers for parents usually, or for grandparents. So this investment really englobes many areas and many aspects that go across even the health and social care divide, but across many other areas like environment, age-friendly or dementia-friendly communities, all what we didn't talk about now, technology in the household and things like that. So there is investment necessary, but it is investment with a return.
¿Alguna pregunta más? Yo tengo una cortita. Maybe it's not an average important question, because both of you know that I'm a stats guy. So both of you have highlighted gaps in research collecting long-term data. So, in your opinion, what's the immediate or the more important actions that the government can take to improve research in long-term care?
Yeah, that's yours.
That's fine. Okay, so where I think the biggest gap is, and it's glaring, and it's, to my mind, entirely unacceptable, but we continue to do it. We do not have data almost in any country on preferences and expectations of care. So we assume we know what people want and what people expect, but we do not actually ask them. The last thing this was done systematically across Europe was in 2008. There was one Eurobarometer. We keep talking about trying to redo it. It's not done. We don't know. We assume that people want to be cared at home. This should not be the case. If we talk about person-centeredness and if we talk about responding to needs, we should start with understanding what those needs are, first and foremost. In terms of the system itself, I think Kai is exactly right. That, of course, we focus on public investment and what policymakers can and should do, because that's where we feel we can influence things. But our knowledge about, private investment, out-of-pocket payments, catastrophic payments, OECD is doing fantastic work now, but the data is really, really poor. We have, we're so much further in health than we are in long-term care because the data is poor. And finally, I think a big issue with long-term care is that many countries collect data that they do not use. And this is something that we find everywhere we go, that there are many different data collection mechanisms. The data, the providers or people invest time in getting this data, but it's not coordinated, it's not pulled together, and it's not used. So we actually should be knowing much more about our long-term care systems, but we do not have good data infrastructure. It's very basic things, really.
Yeah. Also, well, we are working on OECD is working on all types of indicators, and then we are comparing apples and pears. This is still the case, and when it comes, on the one hand, we would need bottom up, but a care home is not a research center, so nurses or long-term care workers, as I call them, are already complaining about a lot of bureaucracy, but this is partly because then nothing happens with these data. This is what Stefania meant. So there are data collected, but nothing is done about it. And this is also regarding quality development, because if we have data, not everybody has to become Sweden or Denmark. I think here we need to develop a kind of quality thinking, quality management thinking, where we say, okay, this can be reached, but for us, for the next year, this would be our goal, and therefore, well, hopefully we're then not working towards this goal. Well, we are working towards this goal, but not only for the statistics, but for the reality. And this is something to be developed also in the workforce, a kind of quality thinking. It's not, because this is also what is lacking for many care workers, long-term care workers, I guess, because in the health system, you see somebody is cured for that. But usually the aim of the health system is clear, it's cure. But in long-term care, you never have this. Yeah, you have small improvements, perhaps in rehabilitation to a certain degree, but you don't have this moment of success. And I think, data-driven working could help in this, also to the workforce. But if you do something about it, so if you see, okay, we have 10% of pressure source among our residents, then perhaps we should do something about it, and then we can measure this. So here, this is still a clinical indicator and relatively easy. In long-term care, it should be more about the quality of life of the persons. Also there, you can measure it in more or less subjectively, but still something. You can work towards it. And this could be one way also to improve the motivation and the satisfaction of staff if this is done together and not blamed on somebody, but done in a teamwork.
¿Alguna pregunta más? Que parece que hay una mano levantada. ¿No? Pues Stefania, Kai, we really appreciate your presentations today. Thank you very much.